Calculus is often seen as a boring, taxing math field forced upon higher-level high schoolers, but its history is in more conflict than one might think. Developed independently by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz and Isaac Newton, the issue of who truly deserves the credit is still relevant today. At the time, the late 1600s, Newton was the clear winner of round one. As some background, let it be known that he did technically come up with it before Leibniz, first developing his Fluxian method of calculus in 1665, yet not publishing until 1704, while Leibniz came up with his more elegant notation in 1673 and published in 1684. Newton had written letters with coded references to what he'd been working on to Leibniz throughout the 1670s, and Newton's students argued in court that Leibniz had stolen his ideas from this correspondence. Now, it should be mentioned that Newton, like many other great minds, could be a bit overzealous in their response to competition. At first, the two men were normal colleagues. According to a University of St. Andrews biography of Leibniz, Newton wrote a letter detailing only his results in 1676 to Leibniz, after both had already fleshed out their methods. Unfortunately, this letter took more than a month to reach its target, so when Newton received a response, he assumed the worst. Leibniz had taken 6 weeks to trace back the results and formulate his own methods of calculus. This made Newton mad, not only due to the competition, but also, to quote a letter the next year, the new method solved not a single previously unsolved problem. All these letters spooked the men into somewhat knee-jerk reactions, with Leibniz publishing his methods, and Newton spreading the knowledge of this supposed plagiarism. Now, since we today are used to the instant communication afforded to us through the internet, imagining how long some of this conflict took is a bit difficult. It wasn't until 1711, after he had been working on several unrelated problems, that Leibniz read a paper published by the Royal Society discussing his plagiarism. Confused, and rightfully so, he wrote to them, saying he'd never heard of this Fluxian method. The Royal Society responded in turn, claiming Newton's letters had given, and I quote, pretty plain indications, whence Leibniz derived the principles of that calculus, or at least could have derived them. Since an agreement between the two could not be reached, it went to the Royal Society, forming a committee. Now, one thing to consider is the larger meaning behind this dispute. Although claiming credit for something this large would be pretty exciting personally for either man, they already had many breakthroughs attributed to them and didn't particularly need this for themselves. In fact, Leibniz had just discovered binary arithmetic, and of course Newton had many claims in the field of physics, most notably gravity itself. So why such a fuss? The simple answer boils down to nationalism. In that time, a period of peace, findings in the intellectual fields were some of the best things a country could achieve. Leibniz lived in Germany, and Newton in England. Whoever got credit for calculus gave their country a much-needed boost in this Enlightenment space race. Unsurprisingly, the committee formed by England itself found the case in Newton's favor. And, unfortunately, this result was not seen by Leibniz until 1714. He did always stay respectful, saying in a letter from that year that he had always carried himself with the greatest respect that could be towards Mr. Newton, and he spent the remaining 2 years of his life attempting to clear himself with Newton and his followers. As I'm sure you can already tell, the general bias today is actually slightly toward Leibniz. Their two notations are used fairly interchangeably, but Leibniz's dy dx is accepted as much more elegant than Newton's f prime, especially for differential equations. Later mathematicians, such as Euler and Bernoulli, exclusively used dy dx for their discoveries. And, as with many great minds, Leibniz was only validated after his life was long over. He may have died very poor and alone, but in the field of calculus, he can now outshine his competitor forever. And hey, at least he didn't have an apple fall on his head.